So, nutrition, and I start with this slide. It's a picture of the famous Greek physician Hippocrates, after which the Hippocratic Oath is named that physicians swear to when they graduate from medical school, which is an ethical oath. But Hippocrates was well known for many sayings which take us back to the types of medicines that were used at the time, and he famously said, "Let thy food be thy medicine," and discussed even back then the importance that nutrition played in health. So these are some of the areas in which nutrition plays a role with allergic disorders. The idea of infant feeding, how we feed infants, what we feed them, when we feed them, even nutrition during pregnancy, and what role that plays in allergic disorders. Food allergies, how are those linked to the treatment of seasonal allergies? Organic foods, should we be investing our money in organic foods for the reason of avoiding or treating allergy symptoms? And specific nutrients, these are things that are found in foods, but that taken either in foods or as supplements may have a role in ameliorating allergy symptoms, such as special vitamins, food products such as quercetin or bromelain, essential fatty acids, those are things like fish oils or flax oil, and probiotics, and honey as well, which is an interesting story. So I'll start at the beginning with infant feeding. I do work with families prenatally, and we do discuss nutrition during pregnancy, and many of these same tenets about healthy eating do affect both the mom and the baby, of course. When I do start with families in my office, typically we're talking about breastfeeding and or formula feeding. There is pretty clear evidence at this point that exclusive breastfeeding for the first 4 to 6 months does lessen the rate of allergic disorders. Some of that is due to the factors in the breast milk that are immune factors. Some of it is due to the diets that moms eat while they're breastfeeding. Although breastfeeding alone, with or without control for the mother's diet, does seem to be protective. Of course, not all mothers can breastfeed or desire to breastfeed, and I do think it's an intensely personal decision. And although we do support breastfeeding, we recognize that some families cannot or do not choose to, and that formulas are used by a number of families either in conjunction with breastfeeding or alone. And there have been studies that show that certain formulas for some babies may predispose them to fewer allergic disorders, including food allergies and asthma and eczema as well. And these formulas are not necessary for all babies, but certainly there's a trend towards more organic formulas, and I'll discuss organic foods in a bit. But also, if cow's milk formulas are not the right choice for your baby, and they may not be, nor may soy formulas be, there are hypoallergenic formulas that your doctor can discuss with you that may be more appropriate. And if a baby is showing signs of those early atopic march signs, the reflux, the eczema, those are warning signs to me to say, hey, let's stop for a minute, look at what's happening, and maybe there's a role for either change in the maternal diet, what moms are eating when they're breastfeeding, and or which formulas we're using. And so it's a red flag we need to pay attention to. What about maternal diets during pregnancy and while breastfeeding? Well, the latest data does not really support the concept that what people eat in terms of specific foods, avoiding allergens like peanuts or nuts or cow's milk or soy or wheat, specifically in these studies does not seem to make a difference towards the development of allergies in people's children. That's not to say that, of course, if you're allergic, you should, of course, avoid that, or if you notice symptoms. But just avoidance diets during pregnancy or while breastfeeding do not seem to make a huge difference. That being said, in my own personal experience, in my practice, I do observe that certain moms, while they're breastfeeding, if they avoid certain foods, can cut down on some of these allergic disorders, and I do work with parents in this way. The other question is solid food introduction. What do we introduce, and when is the best time? This may play a role in the development of allergic symptoms as well. And so do we start at birth? Do we start at 4 months? Do we start at 6 months or later? This has changed over time so that if you go back 40 years or so ago, babies even started solid food introduction at 2 or 3 weeks of age. And in many cultures, this is still done. It does seem to be the case, and studies have borne this out, that waiting on solid food introduction to at least 4 months of age after birth does seem to reduce the incidence of allergic symptoms. Whether 4 months is preferable to 6 months, which has been debated back and forth, is still up for debate and does not seem to matter for most children, but waiting till at least 4 months does. What foods do we start with? Well, really depends on culture and what parents are comfortable with, but there is a movement away from starting with grains, such as the time-tested rice cereal, if you will, which in most cases is a powdered white rice mix, which is not the healthiest thing on earth to feed babies and not the tastiest thing to start them with. And so I now, as many pediatricians are starting to do, recommend starting with fruits and vegetables. And these can be locally harvested, organically grown fruits and vegetables, almost all of which are safe to feed starting at 4 to 6 months, taste much better, and have higher levels of nutrients, which may reduce allergic exposure. The timing of how many foods to introduce at once, when we introduce proteins, whether or not to introduce meat products, these are all very personal decisions, and this is what we discuss with families one-on-one. So we talk about foods. Are food allergies related in some way to allergic disorders or allergic rhinitis? Well, this is from this past year, from a study that looked back at the 10 years from 1997 to 2007 from the Centers for Disease Control, that the prevalence of reported food allergy increased 18% among children under 18 years old. This is a fairly staggering increase. It's been called into question over the past 2 days, front page media stories talking about whether or not we're overestimating food allergy. And I think two things are getting mixed up. One is that this latest criticism, if you will, refers to people who are self-diagnosing allergies and saying I'm allergic to a food, when in fact they may not have documented immune allergy or IgE allergy, but food sensitivities, which I feel are important as well, but may not be documented in the blood in the same way, which is different than some of these other studies that I'm talking about here, which are often diagnosed allergic disorders. It is very clear that food allergy is on the increase, and even in the most conservative estimates may affect 8 to 10% of children.